Recording has started. So far, we have talked about incidence of tax. But now, today on, today we'll first add one uh, addition to the narratives that you have gone through so far. Right? The first thing is, what if the market structure is not following profit control? We'll see that this is something what we call uh, when we talk about incidence of tax on uh, the debate we went through yesterday in our not yesterday, last lecture, that the tax is intended for someone, but the incidence is someone on someone else. So, as if you remember, it can be shifted forward or backward. And what we learned that depends completely on the elasticities of demand and supply of that particular market, whether it's a goods market or it's a factor of production market. Right. Now, does the result or do the results hold true if we relax the assumption of profit competition? The answer is no. In fact, in our last set of uh, analysis, what I found that, take for example, if uh, demand or supply is completely inelastic, then the burden falls on only one part, right? But the burden is equivalent to the tax. The first thing that we should understand now, that take for example, we start with a monopoly structure. If we assume linearity in the functional forms, like the marginal cost, the demand, hence the marginal revenue, average revenue, all those curves, if we assume linearity, then the tax burden will be shared between the producer and the consumer. So take for example, we take this linear form. And there is a tax on the output or a corporate tax. So what will the monopolist do? It will incorporate this tax in its cost function. So let's assume there is a per unit tax, unit of output. So we have the marginal cost before tax and marginal cost after tax. And we can see that's the tax rate per unit. So when the tax was not there, the market clearing price quantity couplet was P naught Q naught. Good enough. The moment we introduce the tax by say an amount T given by the vertical intercept between the marginal cost curves, the equilibrium price and quantity becomes P1 and P2. And increasing price means the burden is shifted forward to the consumers. But that's exactly half the amount of the tax. So the producer and the consumer, they bear 50% of the tax. They share it. Problem is, what if we assume non-linearity? We in economics we talk a lot about different types of functional forms. right? So let's stick to that linear cost function, but just change the demand curve to a constant elasticity of substitution. So we have rectangular parabola. Sorry, hyperbola. Rectangular hyperbola. Now look, you have a demand curve and you have a marginal revenue curve. Demand is basically AR, marginal revenue is obviously derived from the AR curve or the demand curve. Here also, pre-tax, it's P naught Q naught, post-tax, P1, P naught, P1, Q1. Now look, what we see, the tax rate remains the same, but the jump in price is far higher. So not only the consumer bears the entire burden of the tax, the monopolist uses that inelastic portion of the demand part, more inelastic, right? In this rectangular hyperbola, the more we have quantity, when the quantity increases, the portion becomes flatter of the demand curve. Higher, it's basically what? What is this rectangular hyperbola? The functional form tells you what? Asymptotic with the axis. So the lesser the amount, higher will be the price jump. And this price jump is more than that of the tax burden. So not only the consumer bears the entire burden of the tax, he ends up paying more. Now, how can we generalize this observation? We basically go back to a simple formula of the relationship between the marginal revenue and the elasticity. This is a very simple formula we always use. Now, under a monopolist, what do we have? The equilibrium condition is MR equal to MC, profit maximizing equilibrium condition. So let's utilize this equilibrium condition with the marginal revenue elasticity relationship. And what we get, we rework on this equation, replace MR by MC, rearrange, and put price as a function of marginal cost and elasticity. Fine. The moment you increase tax, the price increases by a multiple of the denominator. So if the elasticity, you put the value, the mod value, the mu here is the mod. Elasticity is negative of del x by del pp, right? The mu, the elasticity of substitution mu, not elasticity of substitution, the price elasticity of demand that we have put here is the mod value. So if the elasticity is 2, how will the price increase? 1 minus half, half. So price increase will be price P. So increase tax dependent, contingent upon the value of your elasticity. The increase will be adjusted by a multiple of this very simple formula. So when we talk about imperfectly competitive markets and monopoly, is it a stringent assumption? Absolutely not. In fact, that's more and more realistic. Take for example, you have increasing returns to scale, IRS production function. That means the more I produce, the lesser will be my average cost. Or let's remove fixed cost, the lower will be my marginal cost, right? Now, which farm in the industry will become the beneficiary of this particular assumption or this particular production function? The farm with the largest plant size. The farm with the largest plant size in the industry will produce the maximum, incur the minimum marginal cost, can charge a price which we'll call a killer price. Will kill the competition, will outcompete every other farm in the industry, will become a monopoly. So when we talk about imperfect competition and monopoly, or say oligopoly, that's a more real life story than a farm, an industry with a number of farms all behaving perfectly competitive. Now, we have one side of the story that I have a monopoly or maybe a oligopoly, and I have imperfect competition. Clubbed with that, depending on the demand side of the story, there is a possibility, as we just saw in case of CES demand function, constant elasticity of substitution demand function. What do we get? More than 100% option. So, how do we uh, confirm that the demand curve will be like that? Whether it will be linear, whether it will be a CES type, whether it will be a Cobb-Douglas type. This demand side of the story depends on behavior. And you need to have a number of behavioral assumptions. Unfortunately, unlike hard sciences, lab-based sciences, when we bring this human element, we cannot have a consensus. And that makes our life more difficult. Why? It's a very classic story I always tell to my students uh, from the beginning to understand the complicacy of the type of models we deal with is the classic simple Newtonian experiment that a feather and a weight of say 1 kilo will fall at the same time from the same height if we do the experiment in a vacuum. As long as these assumptions are met, whether you run the experiment on Earth or Moon will not make any difference. Or when you go for fission or fusion under the strict assumptions, the same result will come. We, when bring the human element, what do we do? We basically complicate the story because, take for example, all people here, the 50 of you present here, will behave in 50 different ways in the same environment. So we cannot have a consensus. And that is why when we talk about the demand curve that a monopolist faces, it becomes really, really critical. Why? A monopolist just needs to find that demand curve. Everything else will maximize his profit. Everything else is ready-made for him. So the only thing in which a monopolist should invest is to correctly predict the demand curve. At least the shape of the demand curve. That's it. Once he has that information, you have everything. And this is why I'm deviating a little bit more now. When we talk about the type of information we give while using free products like Google, generates the big data and analysis of that huge amount of data from billions of or millions of consumers basically give a rough estimate of the demand curve that these business houses face. And that is why the demand side is far more important than the supply side. Because the supply side parameters are tangible. You know exactly the prices of the inputs. You know exactly the wage you should give. You know exactly the rent you should be paying, the fixed costs, the tax amount, quantifiable and tangible. But the demand side is quite intangible. And hence, there is a lot of disagreement among economists, policymakers, analysts when we talk about the shape and size of demand curves. Now, we have discussed one thing before that there can be two different types of taxes, seemingly completely unrelated, but they behave in an equivalent manner. A tax on a commodity and the social service taxes, social security taxes. And you will see that a number of these taxes that we see in our economy are equivalent. So I will just invoke the classic macroeconomic identity. What is the national income of a country? What is the GDP of a country? You can measure it in three folds. One is from the income side, so the national income. What does it do? It sums up all the income accruing to the different factors of production or individuals in our society. The other way is the value of the commodities or goods produced. So at the aggregate level, national income and national output will give you the same value. Leave apart the statistical discrepancy. Now, if you put an uniform tax on income, which is you put one uniform rate of tax across all sources of income in the economy. On the parallel, you can do other things. You put an uniform rate of tax on any output that is being produced in the economy. If my national income is equal to my national output, then uniform tax on income will generate the same revenue as compared to an uniform tax on output. Right? Very simple. And hence, this uniform taxation on income and uniform taxation on output becomes economically equivalent. They repair or they generate the same revenue. Next, in neoclassical economics, when we talked about different models of, say, trade and production, we talked about the good is being produced, and that's all. And these are the costs. There is some difference in short run, long run, envelope theorem, and that's fine. That's all. But in real life, what do we see? We see that a particular good is not produced just at a one. It involves a number of stages and what we call a modular production structure. Now, what is the value of the final product? It is nothing but the sum of all the values which is being added at different stage of production. Let's take the example of a simple writing pen. And let's assume it has three components: a plastic encasing, a plastic refill, a ink, liquid ink, and a small steel nib through which we write. Now, it might well be the case that these four components, let's boil it down to three: the plastic components, the ink component, the steel component. So the value of the pen is nothing but the value of the plastic plus the value of the ink plus the value of the steel component. Now, you can do two things. You can impose a sales tax, which is nothing but a tax on the pen as a whole, as a final good. Or you can impose the same tax rate for the plastic component, for the ink, and for the steel component. Adding up, fine, they add up, no problem. Just when you keep the tax rates uniform, the value added tax and the sales tax become equivalent. Moreover, now what we have done, tax on aggregate output. Let's aggregate them across all things that produced in the economy. So basically, I'm talking about uniform output tax. Again, that might be equivalent to an aggregate or uniform income tax. So if you put a flat uniform rate of say 12%, 15%, whatever, let's assume 15% of value added tax, and you impose a uniform income tax of 15%, the tax revenues will be same. They will become equivalent. When we talk about this value added tax, in India, apart from 3 or 4 items, all other things are within the ambit of the VAT. What are these items which are not within the ambit? Petroleum products, alcohol, then tax on registration of properties, which we call the sales deed or stamp duty. Those things are the 3, 4 items only, which are beyond the GST. Everything else are within GST. In Europe, VAT was introduced much before, but VAT is not applied to investment goods. So basically, what is being done? VAT is imposed only on goods which are consumed, so consumption goods. So basically, you're taxing consumption. So European form of VAT is equivalent to a uniform tax on consumption. Why? Again, look from the income tax notion. My income can have two parts, consumption and savings. If savings is tax exempted, then basically you are taxing my consumption. So a consumption tax becomes equivalent to income tax where savings are exempted. Now, from now you'll see, we'll just try to hint upon the macro picture a little bit from these microformulas. Now, take for example, there is an individual who received no inheritance, and when he died, he left no bequest. So he was born without any wealth, he worked, he consumed, and he died. Now, for a person like this, you put an uniform tax on his wage or on his consumption, results will be the similar. But things will change the moment we bring in the microfoundation or the overlapping generations model. Let's assume his wage income and suppose the individual has lived for 2 periods in life. You can broadly say the period one as when he earned wage, period two is his retired life when he earned his pension. So wage income in period one is W1 and W2 in the second. The choice to the individual is a very different choice. It's not about the utility function that we in general in neoclassical economics we talk about. What is the utility function? It's a function of the different consumption. So suppose there are two goods, so C1 and C2, the direct utility function. Or you can go for the indirect utility function, which is nothing but a function of the relative prices and your income. So small p and m. And we talked about income effect and substitution. Here the picture changes. Now the utility frontier that will be concerning us is the decision the individual takes where it divides his life consumption into C1 and C2, where C1 is his consumption of period 1, C2 in period 2. Why? Because now in period 1, he can either save or borrow. If he saves, he will invest it and earn an interest rate, say at the rate smaller. So if she saves $1 in period 1, she will get 1 plus $8 in period 2. Now, if you impose wage tax, T, what will happen? The budget curve will laterally shifts downward because the wage tax is nothing but keeping your disposable income at I minus T. Initially it was I, now it's I minus T. So it's a scalar shift or lateral shift. Rate of return or the interest rate that we're talking about, that does not change. You get the same effect if you put the same T on consumption tax. So you can impose a tax on his W1 and W2, where the interest, dividends, or these capital gains, these are not taxed. Or you can tax C1 and C2. Both will return the same tax rate. So when you do not have a wealth to start with, or a wealth you keep aside for future generation, and you think about a person who lives for two periods in life, this will be the classic choice that will maximize his equity. So remember when we talked about something called tax based on lifetime income? Some lectures back we talked about it. And we found out there are some problems in it. Problems like if this person lives for two period, which consumption to tax, when to put the tax, and blah blah. But now, when you look into the real picture, we just add two things. That he comes with zero wealth, he leaves with zero wealth. That's one assumption. Second assumption that the interest income, um, the dividends he earns, these are not taxed because these are savings. And you're assuming you either put a tax on the consumption or you put a tax on the income but exempt the savings. If you do that, then this a lifetime consumption tax or a lifetime income tax will become equivalent. Now, there are certain other things we need to understand tax incidence. First thing first, this type of incidence of tax or the analysis we have done so far is a partial equilibrium analysis. We have talked about the demand curve and the supply curve. So you have assumed everything else remains constant. The moment we generalize it and delve into the general equilibrium framework, things will change. Because a corporate tax, as we discussed earlier, is not only tax the profits of corporations, but it's also a tax on the capital. And that capital is mobile. So there is an economy-wide impact on the capital stock of the economy. So our analysis will become a little more complicated. And the answer to that problem in reality is not the 2 cross 2 cross 2 general equilibrium framework we have started, the Edgeworth box that we have started or we have learned. But more importantly, let's divide the economy into certain sectors: agriculture, mining, manufacturing, services. Yes. Someone wanted to say something. I heard some feedback scratching. No idea. If anyone wants to say something or ask something, please raise your hand or just stop me and ask the question. Okay. Now, the way we should understand the impact of tax or say increase in the rate of tax in an economy, then the simple general equilibrium framework will tell you again an incomplete story. The actual story will be revealed by what we call a computable general equilibrium model. But that's beyond the scope of this particular course. Now, what CGA modeling does, I'll just give you a brief idea, and then the entire picture will become at least partially visible to you. Let's take the economy as a whole. Let's divide the economy into certain broad groups of economic activities: agriculture, mining, manufacturing, services. Now, there are a lot of agriculture inputs that goes into mining, manufacturing, and services. A lot of mining outputs goes into the production of the other three. Now, how much of agriculture? So you can think of a 4x4 matrix. So you have a row: agriculture, mining, manufacturing, services, and you can also have the 4 columns of agriculture. So agriculture to agriculture, how much of agricultural output has gone into inputs of agricultural output? Might seem a little hazy, right? But look, if you bring agri-food products, beverages, edible oils, everything into the agriculture part, then what will happen? You get coconuts. A lot of coconuts goes as inputs in producing coconut oils, right? Now we just try to find out how much share of agricultural output has gone as input into agriculture, manufacturing, mining, services. So you have a 4x4 matrix in front of you. I'm just giving you the simplest structure possible. And this is what we call an input-output matrix. In wage terms, we call it a social accounting matrix. Now, these are nothing but the coefficients we use while describing the general equilibrium framework. So what is the price of agriculture? Suppose I'm talking about agricultural output as a whole. What is the price of the agricultural output? That is contingent of how much labor and capital has gone into agriculture, and the respective prices of labor and capital. So in a very simple framework, P1 is equal to, say, AL1W plus AK1R, where AL1 is the coefficient of production or the labor coefficient of agricultural production, which means how many units of labor you require to produce 1 unit of agriculture. Now you can have all these sectors together, all these equations together. So you can have like a 20 sector model, and the total number of equations will come to 70 equations, 78 equations. You cannot solve it manually. And that is where computable general equilibrium modeling comes. And once you have that data, the social accounting matrix data, you get the coefficients. From the output data, national output, you get the output data, price data you get, wage data you get, rent data you get, plug everything together and see what is the equilibrium. Equilibrium values of P, equilibrium values of W's, R's, and say X1, X2, these outputs. Now what you do, you change one tax rate in one of the, say, manufacturing sector. everything will change and you settle down to a new equilibrium. And that's exactly how, in reality, this impact of tax can be calculated in its full extent. Second thing, the short run versus the long run. In general, both demand and supply curves will be less elastic in the short run, right? We, when the prices change, the supply decision, demand decision, they take time to adjust. So in the short run, we mostly have inelastic or less elastic demand and supply curves. Long run are more elastic. And hence, you understand the incidence of taxation, the same taxation will be different in the short run, different in the long run. Third thing, whether the economy I'm talking about is the open economy or a closed economy. What is the open economy? Open economy is an economy which trades with other nations. Closed economy is like North Korea, which does not have any relationship with the outside world. Not politically, but say in terms of production and consumption. In general, in the entire world right now, there are very, very few countries like Mongolia, then Tonga, Nauru, and most of these names you might not have known also. Try to find out there are countries named Nauru, Nairu, a country called Tonga, Tonga, and you'll be at loss. Arey bhai, kahan se aa gaya? Never heard of these countries. But these are countries, countries, island nations, Polynesian nations. Then you have these old USSR countries in Central Asia like Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and then country like Somalia. So very few countries are there which closely resemble what we in economics say closed economics. So they do not have trading relationships with the rest of the world. On the other hand, countries like India, China, Singapore, US, Japan, all these prominent economies that we know about, countries we know about, all go for substantial trade. Now, what is the difference between open and closed economy? In open economy, even if there is a supply side shock, I can immediately import. Closed economy, I'm not importing. So if there is a supply side shock, my supply curve is much more inelastic. So the analysis of tax incidence is contingent upon the elasticity of the supply curves. And the supply curves, their elasticities are contingent upon whether the economy is an open economy or a closed economy. Finally, the last thing we need to understand is, so far what we have seen, different types of taxes having the same result. So when it comes to a complex mixed economy like India with so many types of taxes, we need to have a differential analysis of taxes. So in general, it is not that one tax is being increased or one tax is decreased. It's a mixed bag that comes together. So if one tax is abolished, another is being generated so that the tax revenue remains constant using the tax equivalence or revenue equivalence. When we talk about our budget analysis, every year the government comes with a budget. And in general, we see that India, take for example, will be unable to provide a budget which is a surplus budget, which means government's earning is more than government's expenditure. Why? India is a developing or underdeveloped country. Let's call it a developing economy. If it's a developing economy, the developing programs, the public goods, everything that has to be supplied are much more vis-a-vis a developed country. So a major target of our finance ministers, whether it's the finance minister of India or a finance minister of a state, the best thing that they can go for is a balanced budget. Where in the national income identity, G is equal to T. Government earning equal to the tax, the government expenditure. Earning is from tax, G is the government spending. So G is equal. Now, the moment you change a tax, the revenue changes. Hence, the government expenditure has to change to maintain a balanced budget. So, if there is a requirement for mass vaccination, mass COVID vaccination, then the government is bound to introduce some set of new taxes to generate that revenue. Finally, let's talk about growth economics. When we talk about growth, which is the first model that comes to your mind? For me, it's a very simple solo growth model. Whichever university, whichever department, if there is a course on economics of growth or growth economics, the solo growth model will be definitely taught. And what does it say? A steady state. K dot. What is K dot? K is the capital stock of an economy. K dot is DKDT, not DKK. DKDT. Or you talk about the capital accumulation. The moment you introduce corporate tax, you're taxing capital. So you need to give certain subsidies that will also affect the price of capital. Such that if I want to have a balanced growth approach, this steady state is unaffected or capital accumulation remains unaffected. Okay, so let me stop here today. And please go ahead if you have any questions.
So what is the name of the growth model you mentioned?
Solo. SOLOW. There are different types of growth models. In fact, if you're interested at all, say particularly students who are not from the HSS or MS Economics program, let me try to give you the name of this book. Where is it? Where is it? Yeah. How can I? Yeah. I'm typing. This book, it's a very slim paperback. And this book, without getting into the very strong nitty-gritties of economic theory, very casually discusses all the growth models. If you want the technicalities of growth models, then the book by Darren Asimov. So I have given you the simplest and the toughest, as if you're interested at all. But the Charles Jones book is a very standard. It talks about, it explains in very lucid way the growth models that we talk about. And why capital and growth are so important or interlinked. Apart from skill development, it is the accumulated capital which will be reinvested. Reinvestments means higher production, and higher rate of growth. So you broadly divide. Land is fixed. Natural resources are limited. Labor supply is also limited to a certain extent. So the growth trajectory that one particular economy can achieve is through higher and higher rate of capital accumulation. And in fact, there is a fantastic, absolutely fantastic paper by Nobel laureate Krugman on capital accumulation and the north-south divide. It talks about why rich becomes richer, poor remains poorer. All in a very simple mathematical framework. It was published, this Krugman thing was published in 1981, long back, in Journal of Development Economics. So if people are interested in growth economics, how economies work, growth is an offshoot of macro. Right? You need to understand macro a little bit. And then these models will, in fact, there is another very important model called the von Neumann the same Neumann, the Norman Morgenstern uh, utility function we use in uncertainty, the same von Neumann. All these models that you can come across, they're either particularly the older models will stick only to capital accumulation. The newer models try to invoke skill development so that productivity of labor goes up. So if productivity goes up, the net profit will increase. So reinvestable surplus will increase. But capital accumulation, no one can easily. If we're talking about growth, look, growth and development are two other things. I'm sticking to the growth, talking about GDP growth. But that capital accumulation is absolutely mandatory. And people also talk about technology progress. But there is a lot of debate on that, particularly again Darren Asimov on man versus machine debate, automation, increasing investable surplus, but you are creating a lot of unemployment, particularly of unskilled labor. How to corroborate these things? So there are issues there. So there are issues with labor, skill development, issues with automation and technology, but no one can say there is a problem with capital accumulation. Until and unless you are a strict leftist, no one will say capital is bad. The centrists will also say it's good. The rightists will always. But you need to have all these views because not one model fits everything, right? The way uh, South Korea developed is very, very different from the way USA evolved, or from the way these Nordic countries evolved, or the way the Switzerland evolved. So the development, evolution of development and growth are different for different countries. The reasons are quite different for different. So not one model will fit everyone. So all the views are important. Any further questions or anything? Please go ahead. Okay, then let me stop the recording.
So the topics for the presentation